At 6, we're live in Calais as channel crossings go on despite the deaths of 27 people, including 7 women and 3 children. Other migrants continue to arrive on the Kent coast today, willing to take the risk of perilous journeys.
We need more cooperation from the British because we're guarding the border for the British.
This is about addressing long-term pull factors, smashing the criminal gangs that treat human beings as cargo, and tackling supply chains. This requires a coordinated international effort.
Here in northern France, we've been inside one of the camps where people who have travelled thousands of miles wait for the green light from smuggling gangs. We'll be looking at what it might take to bring all of this to an end and the options for both the UK and France and the impact on both sides of the Channel.
Also on the programme, NHS vacancies in England reach nearly 100,000. We talk to staff about the pressures. The proposal for an independent regulator for English football is endorsed by the government, but some are concerned it could damage the game. And this beautiful Roman mosaic, the first of its kind discovered in the UK, is unearthed by chance in a farmer's field.
And later in the hour, we'll have Sports Day on the BBC News channel with all the latest reports, results, interviews and features from the BBC Sports Centre.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6 live in Calais. We learnt today a little more about the 27 people who lost their lives in the Channel in the last 24 hours. Their identities are not yet known, but we do know that there were 7 women and 3 children among the dead. One of the women was pregnant. That loss of life, the single worst incident of its kind here in the waters behind me, has raised the question in very intense ways of what the UK and France can try to do to bring all of this, the trade in human beings that takes place in these waters, to an end. The first of our reports today is from our correspondent Nick Beak, who has spent the day inside one of the many makeshift camps that are around the town of Calais, where people who have already travelled thousands of miles to get to this part of northern France try and wait for their chance to get to the UK.
Beside an abandoned train track in northern France, families desperate to resume their own journey to the UK, despite the horror of the past 24 hours. For now, more than 500 people call this camp home. Among them, new arrivals Adil and Siren from Iraq. Their family has grown in the 3 years they've been on the road, trudging through more than half a dozen countries to get here.
Romania, after Hungary, after Namsa, after France, after UK.
But tonight, all 6 will sleep in this tent, and every night until they risk the English Channel.
Would you still be prepared to try and get a boat to the United Kingdom?
We cannot survive here, Siren tells us. We will freeze. We have to go to the UK.
You say you've travelled through lots of countries, including Germany. Now you're in France. Why do you want to try and reach the United Kingdom?
It's much better for families in the UK, she says, and for keeping families together.
This corner of northern France has witnessed these scenes and heard these sort of stories for more than 20 years now. It feels like a conveyor belt of misery. And this is a new generation willing to risk everything to try and make it to the United Kingdom.
We meet a group of Afghan men who say they fled the Taliban this summer. Juma wants to get to Britain so his wife can follow, along with his 3 daughters, who can then continue their studies.
Have you tried to cross already on a boat?
Yeah, 2 times.
And what happened?
The boat was broken in the sea. So the police come, they take it as we all in the water. Yeah, we nearly two died.
Juma then reveals he had briefly met two of those who died yesterday.
I said to him, okay, good luck to go, and I'm not going to you with you. They say bye-bye.
Did it look like they were hopeful? I'm very sorry.
The deaths of so many of their fellow travellers has numbed many here, but it's not changed where they want to go. Nick Beak, BBC News, Dunkirk.
Well, the numbers using this particular route have increased significantly in the last 2 years, and the Home Secretary said in Parliament today that there was no quick fix to this problem. President Macron said again today that more cooperation with Britain was needed, and that acting once people had already reached this part of northern France, well, he says by then it is too late. So what are the options? Our home editor, Mark Easton, has this analysis from Dover.
Boatloads of desperation continue to wash up on Kent's beaches. Only a fraction of asylum seekers in Europe choose the UK, but those that do are usually drawn by family links or an understanding of the English language. In the face of such resolve, what can be done to stop the smuggling gangs, in the Prime Minister's words, getting away with murder? UK politicians have argued more should be done to stop the small boats before they leave French beaches. But it's a huge challenge. The smugglers had been using about 50 kilometres of coastline to launch their dinghies, but that's recently extended to more than 200 kilometres.
The gangs can buy an inflatable dinghy on the internet, drive to a quiet spot near the water's edge at dawn, and have their human cargo in the channel within minutes.
Stopping determined smugglers requires huge resources and huge commitment. The UK and France agree there should be greater cooperation, but the politics is complicated. The French today ruled out the idea of having British police or border force officers operating on their soil, saying it was a matter of national sovereignty.
Progress has been made. 20,000 crossings have been stopped so far this year, but we will continue to work with the French in partnership to ensure that we can avert tragedies as we saw yesterday.
Once the dinghies are in the channel, the options become much more limited. Spotter planes and patrol vessels can monitor the boats, but without the cooperation of those aboard, intervening at sea could be extremely dangerous. A UK tactic trialled this year is to push migrant boats back into French waters, but given yesterday's deaths, that's unlikely to be a solution.
People who voted to take back control have every right to ask the question, if you can't protect the integrity of the borders, what can you control?
Police on both sides of the channel have been working to break the smugglers' chain. Earlier this month, French and UK officers arrested 18 people for supplying boats to the smuggling gangs.
We've got to improve our law enforcement here because the people smugglers, the traffickers, have got a real hold on these desperate people. We need to break that.
The government's long-term solution to stopping the people smugglers is reform of the asylum system, penalising those who come to the UK by unauthorised routes. They've already introduced rules of inadmissibility for migrants deemed to have come from a safe country like France. Despite that, figures released today indicate asylum applications at their highest level for 6 years at 37,000. They also show the Home Office notified 6,500 migrants they could face deportation under the inadmissibility rules. But just a third of cases have been resolved, of which only 48 people were ruled inadmissible, and just 10 migrants have been removed.
The government's reforms aren't going to work. They aren't going to be able to demonstrate that people should be sent back to another so-called safe country. What the government needs to do is recognise that you can't just shut this border.
There are no easy answers to the challenges of international migration, of people on the move. But progress can be prompted by a moment when the human trumps the strategic. This may be one of those moments. Mark Easton, BBC News, Dover.
Well, let's turn then to political reaction to Wednesday's terrible loss of life. The Home Secretary was in the House of Commons answering questions today. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, is in Westminster now. How does the government see its options, Laura, and the best path ahead?
Well, Mishal, as Mark was suggesting there, sometimes there is a moment, a calamity like this that does really concentrate minds, and I think perhaps this is one of them. The Home Secretary said today there was no quick fix to this, but of course she herself has been promising fixes for a good good while now, and there have been lots and lots of promises, but actually how to keep those promises is, of course, an extremely difficult question. But I understand that this afternoon she had what were described as positive talks with her French counterpart. UK officials and law enforcement officers, some of them will actually be travelling to France later tonight to meet with their opposite numbers tomorrow. Both countries, it said, have now accepted that they need to collaborate more closely and work together better on this. And the Home Secretary herself will go to meet her opposite number in France on Sunday. But that said, even if there is more of a spirit of collaboration today, after months of some pretty scratchy relationships with France, there are huge difficulties in actually being able to combat this. It's a very complicated problem. It's not a new problem. And of course, at the end of the day, the government also needs very much the cooperation of the European Union, as well as the cooperation of its near neighbour France. And given how tricky things have been between the two sides of the Channel, that is not something that is completely straightforward, even if the kinds of solution that they're putting forward are actually radical enough, dramatic enough to try to take apart what every politician in this country agrees is an abhorrent trend, something that people do not want to accept, but is extremely difficult to solve, whatever promises are made right now.
Laura, thank you. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg there. Well, before the end of the programme, I'll have more from here in Calais, including a report on how people have continued, despite that loss of life, to get on boats, trying to get from here to the UK through the course of today. And also we'll be looking at the wider picture of how this fits into what's happening elsewhere in Europe. But for now, over to you, Clive, in London.
Mishal, many thanks for that. The time is now 12 minutes past 6. Our top story this evening. Channel crossings go on despite the deaths of 27 people, including 7 women and 3 children. Coming up, the remarkable discovery of a Roman mosaic on farmland in the East Midlands.
And I'm Martine Croxall. Join us for the papers at 10:30 and 11:30 tonight on the BBC News Channel for an in-depth look at all of the front pages.
This time last year, staff at the Royal Derby Hospital were battling the second wave of COVID-19, with many burnt out by the workload or self-isolating. The government says there are more doctors and nurses in England than a year ago, but the employers' organisation for the NHS says recruitment hasn't kept up with the workload, and there are now nearly 100,000 vacancies. Our health editor Hugh Pym has been back to the Royal Derby Hospital to see how staff are coping.
Everyone's kind of on edge at the moment.
The general state of exhaustion and burnout.
It's come as a shock to them, almost like they've been to war.
3 intensive care staff we spoke to a year ago at the start of a winter COVID wave. So how are they now, after 12 months of unrelenting pressure here at Royal Derby Hospital and another winter ahead?
It hasn't let up at all. I think the staff generally are tired, and they are, whether they admit it or not, everybody has some degree of burnout. We're all struggling in some way. None of us are the same as we were 18 months ago in some way or another.
Looking back to last year, how do you feel seeing it to where you are now?
Yeah, not a lot has changed, though I feel we know what to expect now.
Caroline, who's a senior sister, says it's still constantly busy, but she accepts that's just the way it is.
I have up and down days like everybody, but you've just got to carry on and just keep going, really. And hopefully there'll be an end to how busy we are soon.
Still kind of running on adrenaline.
This was Kellyanne last year. Since then, she's left her job as a nurse in intensive care.
It just became a bit too much. It was just being surrounded by sadness and such pressures. I think it was after I left and kind of came out of the situation that I really realised how difficult it was. You do feel the guilt when you come out of it and knowing that your colleagues are still doing it.
Kellyanne, though, is still working in a nursing role at another hospital. COVID patient numbers here are a lot lower than during the peak in January, but added to others who are sick with a range of conditions, there's a heavy workload for staff and resources are stretched. Even under this strain, the dedication of Greg, Caroline and the team is clear.
It's all I've ever wanted to do, it's all I've ever done. We have to cope with days that are bad and days that are good and months that are bad and months that are good, and not everybody survives, even though we pull out all the stops to try and help everybody. If nothing else, when I look back at the last 18 months, I can say that I gave it my all.
Their commitment is clear to see. A reminder, along with the latest vacancy figures, that looking after and retaining staff is vital for the NHS. Hugh Pym, BBC News, Derby.
The government's latest coronavirus figures show there were more than 47,000 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. On average, there were over 43,000 new cases reported per day in the last week. 147 deaths were recorded. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test, which means on average in the past week there were 125 COVID-related deaths recorded every day. On vaccinations, more than 16.3 million people have had their booster jab, which is 28.5% of the population aged over 12. Let's have a look at some of the day's other top stories now. And Manchester United are close to appointing a new interim manager on a 6-month contract. The German Ralf Rangnick is poised to take over but won't be in charge this weekend as he awaits a work permit. United sacked their previous head coach Ole Gunnar Solskjaer last Sunday after a string of poor results. 2 men and a woman have appeared in court charged in connection with the death of a 14-year-old girl in Dumbartonshire 25 years ago. The body of Caroline Glatchen was discovered in the River Leven near Renton in August 1996. Donna Brand, Andrew Kelly and Robert O'Brien made no plea and were remanded in custody. The National Trust will no longer issue licences for trail hunting on its land after Trust members voted to ban it. Trail hunting involves leaving a trail of fox scent for hounds to follow, but has been used as a smokescreen for illegal fox hunting. The Countryside Alliance, which campaigns for field sports, including hunting, says the National Trust is picking and choosing acceptable legal activities on its land. And the television presenter Richard Madeley has been forced to withdraw from I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here after being taken to hospital. The visit was precautionary after he felt unwell, but it meant he broke the programme's COVID-secure bubble and so can't return. Now, the Culture Secretary says she's excited by the prospect of an independent regulator for English football after a fan-led review suggested the idea to ensure the financial stability and good governance of the game. Nadine Dorris says the proposal has been endorsed in principle by the government, but some in the Premier League say parts of the plan risk damaging the game's standing. With more, here's our sports editor, Dan Rowan.
English football seems on course for one of the biggest shake-ups in its history. Today, the game was absorbing the findings of a landmark review that's recommended a new independent regulator. The government confirming it would back the idea.
We support that in principle. We're going to take that away and start looking at how we can make that work. It's a very detailed review, so we really need to look at all the other recommendations and see how we can make those work as well. But I'm very excited about the prospect of an independent regulator.
With more and more clubs spiralling into debt, the football regulator would take power away from the game's traditional authorities, controlling financial regulation and ruling on the suitability of prospective investors. Supporter consent, meanwhile, would be needed over key decisions, such as a stadium relocation.
It's another coronation.
One former player who's championed the idea of radical reform is delighted.
It's a historic moment, this. It is a real opportunity. Let's start to bring the game together rather than acting in sort of what would be sort of self-interest and greed and in our own individual lanes. And the fact that there will be some people disappointed or upset with the report is always going going to happen. You're never going to please everybody, but I do believe it's a good report, and I do believe it actually addresses the 4 or 5 key issues that needed addressing.
The recommendations of the review are designed to prevent any repeat of the attempted Super League breakaway plot by the Big Six clubs earlier this year, sparking an unprecedented crisis and fan protests. But some Premier League clubs, like Arsenal, are expected to resist a further recommendation that they hand more money than they currently do to the rest of the football pyramid through a transfer levy, with some warning that over-regulation could risk deterring future investment.
I grow weary that one particular either group or organization becomes solely responsible, either financially or, some form of structure for everything.
There's other issues too. The review has called for a pilot in the lower leagues allowing the consumption of alcohol in view of the pitch. But the police are concerned.
I think it's unnecessary. People can drink in concourses before and after the games, and I think it would be really a retrograde step that would undoubtedly lead to greater violence in our stadiums.
The league season continues, but for clubs, owners and the fans, the hope will be that this was the week the future of football was placed on safer ground. Dan Rowan, BBC News.
This magnificent mosaic has been discovered in a muddy farmer's field in Rutland in the East Midlands. It was found by the farmer's son while out walking during the lockdown. The mosaic depicts a scene from Homer's epic poem, the Iliad, and although a handful like it have been unearthed in other parts of Europe, it's the first of its kind ever discovered in the UK. The site has now been granted protection following a recommendation from Historic England. Our Midlands correspondent Phil Mackey has been to meet the man who stumbled across a piece of history.
Hidden for more than a millennium and a half, a mosaic so rare nothing like it's ever been found in the UK before, and it's part of a much bigger Roman villa complex from the 3rd or 4th centuries. Excavations were carried out this summer in a farmer's field in Rutland, but the discovery was made in 2020 by the farmer's son, Jim Irvine.
It was amazing, really. I mean, the level of preservation.
He found some pottery fragments, then checked satellite imagery and noticed the outline of what looked like ancient buildings.
And this is the mosaics in this section. All of this.
So the family came back on a sunny day with some spades and started digging.
You can only tell so much from a map and from some crop marks until you actually dig a hole. You don't really know what's in it. So that was a good day out. We didn't really know that what we had. So I expanded the hole up a bit until we came across some what was obviously Roman mosaic tiles, at which point things went a bit silent in the group, and we realised what we had.
Late Roman pottery. Gives us a date of 3rd, 4th century AD, so it tells us...
The University of Leicester provided the archaeologists who've removed some artefacts for study.
It's the most complicated and complete plan of a Roman villa we found, but the icing on the cake really is this fantastic mosaic. It's so unique, and it really emphasises how important this place was.
Well, the mosaic's been covered up again. It's back beneath the soil. That's for its own protection. But it's hoped, at least it's hoped by Jim, that at some point in the future it can be uncovered again so that people can come and see it for themselves.
I would really like people to be able to do that. In fact, I'm going to order my toga and sandals when I get back so I can show people around. The best way to preserve this archaeology is to preserve it in situ, which is where it is now, and it can be opened up occasionally for people to look at in future generations.
They've only excavated a tiny part of the site so far, so there could be many more discoveries in the digging seasons to come. Phil Mackey, BBC News, Rutland.
Absolutely stunning. Now, time for a look at our main story, and Mishal is back in Calais. Hi there.
Clive, thank you. We're here this evening because of that loss of life in the Channel, shocking in its scale. 27 people, men, women, children, one yet to be born. And even despite all of that, today from these very beaches, people were getting into similar boats and setting off trying to reach the UK. Our Paris correspondent Lucy Williamson has this report now on what she saw today in Calais.
This tragedy stopped 2 nations in their tracks. But on the Channel today, it was business as usual. More boats of migrants arrived in Kent this morning. Fear just isn't enough to slow a trade greased by profit and fuelled by hope. The boats they came in on as flimsy and dangerous as the one that capsized yesterday. Behind them in the waters off northern France, searches continued today. At Sangatte, a body was found, but police say it's unlikely to be a passenger from yesterday's boat. 2 passengers, thought to be from Somalia and Iraq, are said to be stable in hospital, perhaps the only survivors from a day of horror.
We were on patrol. We recovered 6 bodies that were adrift. We passed an inflatable that was almost completely deflated. The little air that was left helped it to float. Trying to recover the other bodies was unfortunately like fighting a losing battle.
There are questions here about whether the boat may have been hit by a container ship, but any puncture on boats like this can be fatal. It deflated, the French Interior Minister said, like a child's paddling pool. This is where the boat is thought to have set off from on its journey to the UK yesterday. A local mayor told us the people smugglers here have become much more violent over the past year, and the turf wars between them more vicious. Some, he said, are now carrying guns. In Parliament today, the Home Secretary said the solution was international coordination.
What happened yesterday was a dreadful shock. It was not a surprise, but it is also a reminder of how vulnerable people are put at peril when in the hands of criminal gangs. There is also, Madam Deputy Speaker, no quick fix.
Could this tragedy have been stopped? In the UK, suggestions today that the French police could be doing more. In France, the blame was sent the other way.
Quand ces femmes et ces hommes arrivent sur les rivages,
when these men and women arrive on the Channel coast, it's already too late. This morning, the Prime Minister had a meeting and we considered all our operational conclusions. We got maximum presence on the border using drones and mobilising our reserves. We need more cooperation from the British because we are guarding the border for the British. These people don't want to live in France. Those who want to live here will take care of them, with centres in Calais and Dunkirk.
Nous tenons en quelque sorte la frontière pour les Britanniques.
5 suspected smugglers thought to be linked to the crossing have been arrested. France says it's dismantled more than 40 networks since the beginning of this year. So why isn't it having an effect?
The chief of smugglers, they live in England and they invest the money. I make one accusation to the English government. I say, why you don't control the fiscality, the money of this guy.
But in the game of Russian roulette sold to migrants here, faith is the only way forward. 27 people died here yesterday, but hope and determination live on. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Calais.
And if there was one sentiment that I've had a sense of from local people here today again and again, it was really resignation. This has been the reality of the lives of those who live here for so many years now. With me here in Calais is our Europe editor, Katya Adler. We heard from Westminster earlier, Katya. How does France see this? How does the EU see this situation?
Well, of course, we've had an outpouring of regret at the loss of lives. But honestly, Mishal, there is so much politics intertwined with all of this. Of course, with the UK, Boris Johnson promised to take back control over our borders after Brexit. Here in France, it's the upcoming presidential election for Emmanuel Macron. He wants to sound nationalist. He wants to sound tough on security. And so he said again, no to the UK offer of joint patrols on French beaches or in French waters because of national sovereignty, he says. But he has appealed to the EU for help. So in his opinion, this is as much a pan-European problem as it is a bilateral issue with the UK. He says, look, these people desperate enough to get onto these dinghies to go to the UK, they're not coming from nowhere, they're coming from other European Union countries. And of course, what's known as irregular migration is known to the EU. Remember the migration crisis of 2015? We've got Poland now asking for EU help with its border with Belarus. But just as known to Brussels is the inability up until now for EU member states to agree on what to do about this. Germany is more lenient, Hungary says no to more legal migration, and in the meantime, French media says, put this politics aside, save lives.
Katya Adler, Europe editor, thank you very much. And we'll have more from Calais on the 10 o'clock news tonight, but that's it from me for now. Clive, back to you.
Mishal, thanks again. Now, time for a look at all the weather news. It's getting chilly. Sarah Keith-Lucas is here. Hiya, Sarah.
Hi, Clive. Yes, it is getting colder. It's also getting windier too. We've got our first named storm of the season on the way. Now, it was a fairly quiet and calm end to the day here in Bracknell in Berkshire, but things are not going to be quite so serene as we head through the next 24 hours or so. Storm Arwen has been named by the Met Office, particularly later Friday and into Saturday. We're going to be seeing that severe weather, so gales around, severe gales perhaps. Things could turn a little bit wintry, some sleet and some snow, mainly over the higher ground. So Storm Arwen could well cause some disruption through Friday and into Saturday as well. So we've got this area of low pressure, Storm Arwen, which has been developing. It's moving its way gradually further south. So wet and windy weather already across the northwest of the UK, pushing southwards and eastwards through the rest of this evening and overnight. It's really just the far southeast of England that stays with those clearer skies, and it's here that temperatures will fall lowest overnight. Could be around about -2 degrees in the countryside. Most other places frost-free, but from the word go, a windy day. Those northerly winds driving in a mix of sunshine and blustery heavy showers. Now, particularly across northern and central parts of Scotland, that'll be falling as snow. Blizzard conditions there when you add on the strength of the wind. It's going to be particularly windy across the east of Scotland and northeast England, where we've got an amber warning in force through the latter part of Friday and on into Saturday morning. So winds could reach around 70 miles per hour or more. So that area of low pressure, Storm Arwen, just drifting south in the North Sea. And we're going to be seeing those strong northerly winds driving in further showers through Friday night and on into Saturday. So another really windy day, gusts up to about 50 miles per hour or even more than that for some of us, and some scattered potentially wintry showers. So it won't be particularly warm, but Clive, when you add on the wind, it's going to feel really freezing out there this weekend.
Indeed. All right, Sarah, thanks. Sarah Keith-Lucas there. And that's it. So, goodbye from me. Now, time for all the news where you are. Have a very good evening.